I talk about computers, it's not just our laptops, it's not just our smartphones, but it's also, we're talking about airplanes, like planes. If I'm not mistaken, a Boeing 747 has 3 million or somewhere along this region. And in addition to that, smart home is becoming very prevalent. So we're talking about smart fridges, all kinds of things. These are things that uses code in order to function. So as a software developer, the key thing is you're writing instruction for this sort of computer systems, advanced computer systems to do things either that is not suitable for human beings to do or can be more efficiently done by a computer.
For me, coding is really simple. It's pretty much talking to the computer. And you need to know that, when you're talking to a computer, you need to speak in a language, right, that the computer understands. And you need to speak in a certain way that the computer can understand as well. So for example, we are speaking in English, right? So I will need to know my ABCs. But for you to understand what I'm saying right now, I also speak with a certain structure, right? So yeah, when it comes to coding, that's pretty much it, talking to the computers.
Coding is a lot of sort of like logical thinking, but I also like to think of it as an art, right? So it's an art where you can get as creative as you want to think about whatever you want to build.
So what's a coder then? A coder is someone who actually actively speaks to the computer. Like someone who codes means that someone who uses computers, who speak to the computer to get the computer to do something. So very often you see the coders here build apps, right? Build softwares. But of course, you also see that there are other disciplines as well that requires the person to code. For example, data science, machine learning, AI, even gaming, for example, you also need to actually code as well.
Computers are ultimately not very smart machines. Computers are machines that are very good at doing things repetitively and very quickly. So as a programmer, you're writing code, you're writing instructions in the form of code for computers to understand.
We see that there is a rise in entrepreneurship, there is a rise in the digital scene, right? And so coding is one thing that we really focus on so that we empower people with the power to create, right? Create with the computer, and these days we see a lot of creation happens through software. And not just that, digital marketing as well, because we see a lot of people really coming out from their own zone and say that I want to also be an online entrepreneur as well. So which is why we focus on these two skills, because these two skills allow people to actually leverage on the power of digital, right? Being able to reach to so many more people across different borders, across different places. And I think coding as well as digital marketing is that skill for the future.
I think it was sometime around 2010. That year was the year where a lot of very exciting startups were started in the US. Companies like Groupon was very new. And I've always found it very fascinating how, one person sitting in their home, right? Just with a computer on their chairs, they can build a company just like that.
People often ask, what can I do with coding? What can I do after I learn how to code? You must understand that coding is really just talking to the computer. But when you talk to the computer, you can get it to do so many things. For example, some people become coders to become app developers, right? Some people become coders to just purely build websites. But not just that, right? Some people learn to code to build games, to also do data science, machine learning, AI. They don't build apps, but they need to have the coding skills to do those things.
So coding can be for many different platforms, and when you're writing code for different platforms, things can be a little bit different depending on the platform that you're building. But ultimately, what is fundamentally the same is first, you need to be able to envision what you're trying to build, what is the outcome, and then you have to learn how to break down how would you solve any particular problem in a step-by-step manner, and then once you have that step-by-step sort of like instruction, then you convert that step-by-step instruction to actual computer code. I think that will be common, among all platforms. Most commonly, a lot of people who learn how to code, software developers, they would join the workforce as a software developer. But this term, there's many different terms to refer to the same thing. Software developer, software engineering, web developer, mobile app developer, application developer. So these terms are all quite interchangeably used. That is one sort of common, the most common career path for people to begin with.
There is one category which I find it very interesting. We call it the indie hackers. So what's indie hackers? So basically they're building little apps for themselves. And these little apps sometimes can end up being a really big company, right? An example of that would be Keyword2.io. So they started off just doing it for fun, and today they're making easily, millions, right? Millions of USD, just seated there, doing nothing much after that. Of course, there is also another category of people where they build apps and they just build and sell. So, and they're building these apps because it's for them, to have fun, but then they're not going to maintain it and decided that, hey, if anyone wants to pick it up, sure, buy the app for me. So we start seeing this kind of people as well.
What people did programming like 50 years ago is very different from what people do today. In the past, when we talk about programming, it may be a bit more narrow, right? So there'd be less companies writing code. So for example, let's say when you, in the past, maybe like 50, 60 years ago, if you're a programmer, maybe you're working for NASA. You're writing code so that the rocket, can do calculations in real time, to land the rocket on the moon, right? But these days, when we talk about code, it's very different. When we talk about code, it's applied across industries. So what is unique about coding is that it's not an industry of its own. We're really talking about coding as a skill for many different industries. Think about it. The biggest transportation company in the world, Uber, is a company that owns no vehicles. Think about the biggest hospitality company in the world, one of the biggest, Airbnb. Again, it's a company that owns no hotels, but basically all they do is write code, do marketing, take photos of these places. So the world has changed a lot. When we talk about code, it's not an industry of its own. It's really how is it being applied across all different industries.
Bagi membantu pekebun kecil getah dalam keadaan harga pasaran rendah, peruntukan bagi insentif pengeluaran getah akan ditingkatkan sekali ganda daripada 150 juta ringgit kepada 300 juta ringgit. Subsidi harga padi sebanyak 570 juta ringgit. Subsidi dan insentif tanaman padi berjumlah 960 juta ringgit, termasuk subsidi baja padi bukit yang diperkenalkan semula sebanyak 40 juta ringgit. Allowance sara hidup nelayan akan dinaikkan daripada RM250 kepada RM300 sebulan bermula tahun 2021.
If you have no no coding background or you're a total beginner, you can first start off with the first course, which is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But basically what you're trying to do is to build a website from scratch using code. And I think what happens here is that you'll realize a few things, right? You realize if you truly like coding or not. And I think that is very important because a lot of people love the idea of coding, but when it comes to really sitting down and doing and really coding, that is a different story. So I think the first course would be awesome for you to discover if this is something that you want to do.
Before that, I was actually a company secretarial assistant in a law firm here in Malaysia. So I was doing that for about 4 years. So by the time that I decided to join Next, I knew that I wanted a career change because I've been doing it for 4 years, and so I wanted a career change and something new and different. So that's why I joined.
I studied civil engineering in uni, and I came out, I graduated, and I started working in a consulting firm. So it's a civil and engineering consulting firm. I worked as a consultant for 4 years, and then realized that I wanted to pursue my own interest more. So my interest is in coding. So I look up on boot camps. So boot camps allow you to learn something, learn coding in a more short period than, like, say, a degree. The degree takes like 3 to 4 years.
I did Bachelor of Science in Geophysics, and after that I ended up not working in that field, but I did an office-based sales job and it was really boring. It was like 9 to 5, so I wanted to try something new for a change, so that's why I came to do programming. I really enjoyed the course, and I think this is the path forward for me.
I'd heard from a lot of people that coding was the future, was something important that everyone should know and learn how to do. So I wanted to try and move in that direction in any capacity and see how far I could get.
Back in university, I did 2 semesters in computer science. I didn't actually think about changing my degree to computer science, but maybe that's what I should have done, and that's why I came here to actually to pursue that again, to do computer science again.
In technical terms, we learn HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React.js, which is a JavaScript framework or library to make websites more interactive and stuff. We learn about SQL databases, and the backend language we learned was Python. So it's a popular language right now. It's very useful.
It was definitely tough for me in the beginning. Like HTML and CSS were okay because that's just, the front end and the way that things look. But as soon as we started moving into JavaScript, things were a bit more difficult for me. I think part of it is changing the way that you think to think logically and to problem solve in a way that you may not have ever done before.
The Python and SQL stuff, that's one of the more challenging languages to learn, because Python is a proper programming language, and SQL relates to databases, so anything that you do online will probably involve a database. After that, so that's 8 weeks so far. We have 2 more weeks after that to do our own project, to make our own app, or to make our own website, something like that. 10 weeks isn't a lot of time to solidify everything we learned, but it does give us enough to start off with.
So I think because I was surrounded with a really, really good and amazing batch of people and like-minded students, it really helped me to pick things up a lot easier because we talked about it rather than, struggling by yourself.
So this is the Next Academy website, right? But let's just talk about what we have learned just now. We talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So look at this website. It looks pretty and whatnot, but let me show you that behind this pretty website is a lot of code. Can you see this? Right, this is what makes the entire website. To make it more obvious for you, what is HTML? So basically over here, everything you see here is HTML. But let me just show you something. This is basically everything that's here. And the only reason why it looks pretty just now is because I actually have the CSS file in there. And the CSS transformed what you saw just now, HTML, into what you see right now, right? And now it looks like a very nice website. Then the next question you ask, then what is JavaScript? So if you actually move the cursor, see this? we actually use JavaScript to make this happen. You see this menu box up? So this JavaScript actually gives you the ability to give some personality to the website so that it doesn't feel so boring. So now you have it, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What's happening here is that they wanted to build an ecosystem, right? Where they wanted to, there is like, if you see there are like fishes here, and fish will have their fish poop, and they want to use the fish poop as a fertilizer for the plant, right? And so they created this whole so-called ecosystem that's happening here. But what is interesting is that they wanted to automate the whole system. And so they wrote code by using this thing, this Raspberry Pi. So what's happening here is this. Every 1 minute, the water will filter itself and will bring everything from the bottom to the top, right? If you take a look at what's happening now. And then later on, the water will go down by itself. But what you do not see is this. There's two very interesting things here. Number one is that there's actually a sensor here. This sensor is to make sure that the water do not overflow. Like, how would you know that it is time to stop the water from, overflowing from here? So they use this sensor to determine the height of the water. When it reaches a certain height, then it should stop. So that's one sensor here. And another sensor is this sensor over here. This also checks the temperature of this aquarium. And everything is automated with this whole Raspberry Pi. So this Raspberry Pi actually plays a role of a mini computer. And they wrote the code and everything inside here, and literally they just let it run, and it's automating it every single day.
Saya nak menzahirkan rasa terima kasih kepada anda semua sebagai rakyat Malaysia. Anda adalah manusia yang hebat. Kita ibarat sebuah keluarga yang besar. Kita saling bantu-membantu ketika zaman susah. Inilah nilai sebenar persaudaraan rakyat Malaysia tanpa mengira bangsa.
I think one common question that people ask me is, hey, which programming language should I pick up? Different languages have different strengths. You cannot say that, oh, because this is popular, then everything else is useless. It doesn't happen that way, because always remember, different languages have different strengths, and every language may have a different use case. Just to give an example, JavaScript, right? People use it for front-end websites, but people can also use it for the back-end, right? Python, for example, right? We want to see who is the community that powers the language. For Python, it's so diverse, right? We have people who build apps with Python, right? We have people who do data science with Python, do finance trading with Python, do machine learning AI with Python. So when it comes to languages, we cannot just take a look at the language, but we need to see a lot more things. Like, for example, who is the community behind it, and how is the community using the language, right? And the stronger the community, the more versatile it becomes.
I think the biggest challenges I have as a coder is there are too many ideas and too little time to pursue everything. So the key is really just like, what do you want to focus on? And ultimately, because you have the skill, there is that sort of like risk of just end up building a lot of things, but not really marketing it, getting real users to use it, stuff like that. Those are the challenges that I face.
I think today, if there is any challenges, I would say that the awareness is still not there yet. People still do not know what coding is really about. There are a lot of talks about it. I know that the government is talking about it. The government is also actually trying to implementing coding syllabus into the school. But today, I think education is not a lot of education about it yet. So a lot of parents tend to come up to me and just say, I know that coding is really important, but what is it exactly? So I think these are the big questions that we really need to answer, so that everyone is more educated, and in the future we can see our generation and the future generation going towards that path.
I think it's not going to be very different from many other careers. But I think the key thing is curiosity, and then that curiosity should also lead to action. So like the second key quality is being very self-driven. So once you're triggered by that curiosity, you take action to figure things out, to actually try to implement it, to actually go and learn about it.
I think being a coder and being an entrepreneur, they probably need to share some similar traits, right? And the ones that I find that has been doing really well, let's just start off with coding first. Doing really well as a coder is number one, they're not afraid of failure. The key thing is this: when you're doing coding, it is so easy to have a bug or something, an error just appear out of nowhere, right? You fix things here and then suddenly something just appears. That is a very normal thing. And so I think the first thing first is not being afraid of doing something wrong, because you can always fix it. That is the good thing about coding.
So the world has changed a lot. When we talk about code, it's not an industry of its own. It's really how is it being applied across all different industries. We're talking about self-driving cars today, right? That involves coding up AI that powers these cars. So coding is definitely going to be very, very important in the next 10, 20, 30 years to come. And it's becoming a fundamental skill to sort of understand the world, understand the world as we know it today, since computer systems are all around us.
I think in terms of globally, right, I believe that there are a lot of demand for coders, but we also need to understand why is this happening. The fact is this: there are a lot of industries, right? And coding is cross-industry. And coding can be, you can use coding to automate things that, in the past is very manual. But not just that, you can use coding to innovate and to create new things out of it. And I think at this rate, right now, what I'm seeing is that it's not going to slow down. There will be a lot of automation that's happening, but beyond automation, there will be a lot more new innovations that will be coming up, right, through code or whatnot. So I do see that this industry will only grow, because the key thing is this: we are only limited by our creativity. And I think this is very true for coding, because when you know how to code, it's just the ability to create things. But then now your creativity is the one that will drive your innovation.
When we talk about technology, we're really talking about building technology that serves human beings, that makes communities better, that makes our day-to-day living more efficient, better, easier, right? Now you can get a taxi just by opening up an app. So I think it's even more important than learning technology itself is learning about humanity, learning psychology, learning the arts. I think the future belongs to someone who both understand technology and understand humanity. A very well-rounded person.